Welcome to our 50th season of Basic Black. Some of you are joining us on our live broadcast and others of you are joining us on Facebook Live. I'm Callie Crossley, host of Under the Radar 89.7. Joining me tonight are Jose Lopez, Vice President of the Massachusetts Association of Hispanic Attorneys; Yawu Miller, Senior Editor of the Bay State Banner; Rahsaan Hall, Director of the Racial Justice Program for the ACLU; and Phillip Martin, Senior Investigative Reporter, WGBH News. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
So we're here to talk about the Suffolk County DA race. And I think a lot of people might say, why did we pick this race to talk about? Because there's a lot at stake, and I don't think a number of people understand really the importance, the role of the DA. So first we should say that the reason that the race is wide open is that District Attorney Dan Conley decided not to run. He's been in office since 2002. Just to put that on the table. The ACLU is running a nationwide campaign on educating people about the role of and the importance of the DA. So, Rahsaan, start us off with the importance and what is at stake here.
There are so many people that are talking about criminal law reform, and some folks have focused on what the police are doing. Some folks have focused on lawmakers and actually changing the laws. But one of the most powerful people in this system, maybe even the most powerful person, is the district attorney. And rarely do people recognize this person as the most powerful person. The ACLU, we did some polling and found out that 4 in 10 Massachusetts voters did not know that the district attorney was an elected official.
Wow.
In further conversation with folks in some of the focus groups that we did, people did not realize that the district attorney was answerable only to the voters, that there wasn't a supervising governing body that regulated what district attorneys did. And so that's why we decided to launch the What a Difference a DA Makes campaign to educate people on the role, the power, and the influence that district attorneys have, because we want more than just people talking about reform. We want people who are going to go in and dramatically change what district attorneys do, because it impacts so many people's lives, from charging decisions, the issues around mass incarceration, and some of the gross racial disparities that exist in our system.
So, yeah, well, around the country, the ACLU has a nationwide effort to educate people. And one of the reasons is that a number of groups have come to realize, particularly communities of color, about the role of the DA, particularly around issues of police brutality. And this has become very apparent in Ferguson is a good example, where Black Lives Matter, after all of the shooting of Michael Brown, really focused its attention on getting that DA out of office, and they were successful in that. We'll talk a little bit about, pick up where Rahsaan left off, about why folks have really focused now on this role to understand the detriment in many cases to communities of color, that the persons in that role have become to be kind of instruments of that.
Right. I think in Boston, as in other parts of the country, that in other cities, when there have been police shootings, people in the Black community have felt like the district attorneys, there's not enough critical distance between the DA and the police. And the district attorney is the one who's going to investigate police misconduct. But they also have a symbiotic relationship where the police charge a suspect, and then the DA is responsible for prosecuting. The police show up as witnesses. The DA sign off a slip saying you worked the overtime. So there's kind of like a very cozy back and forth relationship between district attorneys and police. And, Black folks have a contentious relationship with police departments, most of which are, run and dominated by people who are not necessarily from the communities that they're policing. So what we have seen, like in Baltimore with the district attorney there, like sort of taking on the cops, not really succeeding. And then in Philadelphia with a district attorney, Larry Krasner, who sort of went in, said, we're going to do business differently. We're going to, he said, we're no longer going to prosecute people to the maximum sentences. If you're going to send somebody away, send me a memo saying it's going to be 3 years, it's going to cost $180,000, and here's why it matters. $360 million a year in Philadelphia going into the prison, paying into the prison system. Again, $60,000 a year per person, whereas the average Philadelphia resident only earns $41,000 a year. He's saying, like, this system of mass incarceration isn't benefiting communities. And I think a lot of people in communities around the country are looking for a different relationship with the criminal justice system, and they see the DA as a linchpin.
So coming back to the Suffolk DA race, Jose, I was interested in, and most of you in talking before the show said experience was really going to be key in looking at the candidates, and there are a lot of them. There are 7 of them now. There are 5, I think, whose names that we may know, but there are 7 now in that race. And I want you to put in context what you mean by experience, because many of them are one that's an assistant, a former prosecutor, others that have roles in and out of the court system. So to the average voter, that would seem like all of them have experience. So what experience do you think is key in this role?
Absolutely. So I think to really appreciate and understand the experience that's necessary, you have to look at what exactly is the function and the role of that office, right? There's definitely the prosecutorial role. So the person who's setting the tone when it comes to what are we going to charge, and what are the marching orders when it comes to the things that we want to prosecute in this office, and what types of things do we no longer really need to prosecute, right? So there's that piece of it. The other piece, however, is really just having the experience in managing a large staff. So we're talking about a staff here, and Rahsaan Hall worked there before, and so he can even speak to the number, but we're talking about over 200, I think over 250 staff members. We're talking about over 150 attorneys, I think 151 attorneys. And these are people who went to law school. And as a graduate of law school, we kind of sometimes have a big head, right? And we can be bullheaded because we spent a lot of time in school. We studied the law, and so sometimes we think we know the answer. So I can imagine that the experience, or let me speak also as a voter, right?
Right.
I'm looking for someone who's really going to, who has, number one, demonstrated that they can run that large of a body. And not just run it for the sake of it running on autopilot, but really try to steer it in a new direction, which is exactly where Massachusetts, I think, has found itself with the legislature passing this new criminal justice reform bill.
So not just like run it like a corporation, because we're talking about different kind of scenario here in terms of it's really life and death.
Oh, no, it absolutely is life and death for many people. Luckily in Boston and Suffolk County, we haven't had as many police shootings, right? But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be thinking about what can we do to prepare to make sure we don't see any more. But more importantly here, what we need to ask ourselves is who has the experience in running this large of an agency, and who has in their experience shown that they can take a large agency and move it in a new direction, because that's what it's going to take. We have career folk that are working in that office. They worked under the current DA. They may have worked under the previous DA. So there are people who are very much kind of settled in what they do and how they do it. We're moving in a new direction. I mean, the people in Suffolk County have spoken, in Massachusetts have spoken. They want to see less incarceration, right? They want to see more probation, people released on personal reconnaissance. They don't want to see many people locked up. And so someone needs to be able to go in there with the chutzpah and say, no, this is where we're going, and be able to send that message. And I think when you look at the candidates, not all of them have yet proven that they have that experience.
Okay.
I think there's still time for them to do that, though.
So, Phillip, the criminal justice reform bill was passed and signed by the governor, and that's what Jose has referred to, and I think a number of other people have referred to here. And it has certain changes, reforms to the bail system, as he said, more of a creation for those pretrial diversion programs that I know, Jose, you're very much in favor of and want to see. And that's where the DA's decision-making comes into play. Do you send someone to, let's say, alcohol reform or a program like that, or do they go straight to jail, locking the key? All of these decisions will fall and take direction from the person holding this job. So put in context now, understanding the impact of this new criminal justice bill that will be implemented by this person. From what should voters be looking for? Jose has given us one thing.
Well, I think everyone here has basically talked about the importance of the DA's race, the significance. And I think what people are looking for are alternatives to incarceration. When we're talking about the opiate crisis,
Number one. That's what you're saying. That's the key thing.
Alternatives to incarceration. I think that rehabilitative justice. I think those things that sound great, but that are actually working. We've seen these things working in parts of the country. Philadelphia is a good example where criminal reform is, in fact, taking on a different face, if you will. One of the points I would make about the DA's race is that I think it's more than just a DA's race. I think we're talking about something that's reflecting, and this is part of what the ACLU is doing, but it goes beyond what the ACLU is doing programmatically. I think what we're seeing also is a movement. And the movement began in the face of incidents like that in Cleveland. The Tamir Rice, the killing of an 11-year-old boy that the prosecutor found unprosecutable.
Right.
And those type of things jumped out at folks in this country, particularly black people and Latino people. These things were so flagrant. You also had the situation locally of Dan Roy Henry Jr., DJ Henry, where you had a situation where the police found where the police and investigators in New York, and this is outside of New York, this is in Westchester County, found numerous contradictions in the police findings, but yet the prosecutors still refused to prosecute. Why? Not because of a symbiotic relationship with the police, but in this case it turned into it was actually incestuous relationship with the police. In this sense, because the prosecutor in this case had relatives who were actually police officers, and she refused to pursue this. My point here is that we're looking at something much broader than just Suffolk County and Middlesex, where there's also a challenge, by the way, to Ryan, and other counties where you see challenges. And all of these challenges are, by the way, impacted by movements. Black Lives Matter, Me Too, all of these things are basically impacting these DA races. These things don't exist in a vacuum. You find all of the candidates who are running in Suffolk County, the five at least. I know you mentioned two who are independent.
Yes, there's two extra
I
ones.
asked all of them about the impact of Black Lives Matter and Me Too, and they all had an answer. And all of them felt that, yes, these things are relevant in the discussion of this DA's race. Getting back to the criminal reform aspect of that, any type of criminal reform, basically, again, is impacted by these movements. And the bottom line is that if you are going to become the DA in Suffolk County, I think you're going to have to acknowledge that folks are very much concerned about ways of addressing justice in a new and different way. And criminal reform is at the top of people's list. And the reason you know that is when you go to some of these forums, like that in Jamaica Plain a few weeks ago, it was packed. Another forum the other day was packed. I have never seen a DA's race attracting this much attention.
Well, it hadn't been open in several decades.
Well, I'm not talking, even
just,
before, even in any county in the Commonwealth. I've never seen a race attracting this much attention. And it's because these outside forces are having a major impact on people's thinking and priorities.
Okay, so let me just let people know what else is in the criminal reform bill that just got passed. We said bail, it repeals some of the mandatory minimum sentences for certain drug offenses, which has been a big issue for a lot of people. Well, I mentioned the creation of new diversion programs. This is another big issue. It makes some crimes committed by young offenders eligible for expungement. And that means that here these young kids, doing something dumb, young, and it just hung around their neck like an anchor. And in this case, obviously we're talking about nonviolent, all those, this can go away. And there's it adds a new 3.5-year minimum sentence for someone convicted of trafficking synthetic opioids like fentanyl and carfentanil, which, as we know, is quite dangerous in combination with heroin. So that's the criminal justice reform bill that got passed. All of the candidates, the five that I know about, I don't know where the other two stand on this. 4 of them said they would support the bill as it was. One, Greg Henning, who works now in the office with Dan Conley, said he would have voted against removal of the mandatory minimum sentence. He felt that was important. So that sets him apart.
And Champion had concerns about the age, right? The age issue.
Right.
She has major concerns about that, feeling that you're granting too much leeway based on age determinants.
Right.
And she's basing part of this on her own political experience, her own prosecutorial experience, and on her experience as being someone, she pointed out, someone who had been homeless. And and felt that experience helped her.
Helped shape her.
Helped shape
But I
her,
think that was a
exactly.
fundamental misunderstanding of what the law was intended to do, because
Yeah.
the raise the age provision isn't saying if you're 18 and you commit a crime, you're not going to be held accountable.
Right.
It's saying that there is a different method to deal with young people because of what we know now about juvenile or emerging adult brain development. But she took this stance on several occasions in these forums to saying if you're 18, you've got to be held accountable, and then kind of pivoted into this, what I perceived as fear mongering, and talked about a incident where an 18-year-old commits a homicide. Well, there's youthful offender statutes to deal with
Right.
young people who commit those types of crimes, but to allow young people to be in an appropriate setting, for an age-appropriate setting, so that they're not influenced by older individuals in an incarceration system, and that they have programming that is more appropriate for their age and their development. It's not giving them a slap on the wrist or letting them go, but it's a different form of accountability that is more age-appropriate.
So Jose, a lot of the 5 candidates, and we should mention that's Attorney Rachel Rollins, State Representative Evandro Carvello, former Assistant District Attorney, I just mentioned him, Greg Henning, and Lyndon Champion, who you're talking about now with regard to the age, and also former Defense Attorney Shannon McAuliffe. Many of them cast themselves as reformers. I mean, Greg Henning, who some people say, no, you're not a reformer because you worked in the same situation that Dan Connolly is in now, so how could you be? But he sets himself apart by saying, I worked in a gang unit, I was a teacher, I have a different focus. I want to come back to this pre-trial diversion program, which I know that you're big on, so that people really understand the decision-making there that can make a difference in someone's life. So you have case studies about this.
I'll share.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what I'm talking about is something that currently exists. So I think the best way to measure whether or not any of these individuals might implement some of these changes and do so in the way that I think the community is asking for is to judge them on how they've already implemented or utilized the measures that are in place to mitigate a very severe criminal justice system, especially dealing with young offenders. So Chapter 276A in Massachusetts is a pre-trial diversion program, which allows for youthful offenders 18 to 21 years old to, before arraignment, which is the moment that you have a criminal record, before arraignment, probation is supposed to stand up and let the judge know whether or not the accused qualifies for pre-trial diversion. And they go through the list. Is a person 18 to 21? Is this person being charged with one of the crimes that are not on the list of crimes that we can't use this for? And if they qualify, they're supposed to inform the judge, this candidate qualifies. Now, I've tried to use that specifically in an instance where a young man had an argument with a girlfriend and allegedly hit her. Now, if that's true, this young man needs anger management. He was drinking, so he needs to deal with that issue. What he doesn't need to do, and he was college bound, is end up in jail with a criminal record. And so when I go into the courtroom and I say, hey, there's a statute that exists. It applies for this young man. We can get him some services and support that he needs. Your Honor, I'd like to proceed with a pre-trial diversion. The immediate response from the current district attorney's office is objection, absolutely not. Will not agree to go in and use this statute we already have that can provide some kind of alternative to the normal course. And at every stage. So if the judge doesn't grant it, then I ask for a 14-day continuance so that the judge can decide. And in the meantime, try to find a program that might be fitting for the situation. And then when we come back 14 days later,
They still fight you
the
on it.
answer again is we strongly object for the record. And so that's the office now. So when I'm judging whether or not the office is going to be able to carry this out, I'm thinking, well, how are those people doing with what they have already? That's one thing. The second thing I'd like to share is that as MAHA, we pay attention to how many of our members,
Massachusetts
Association for
of Hispanic
Attorneys.
Attorneys, okay?
you know, we pay attention to diversity in corporate settings, and we pay attention to diversity in public settings. And when I look at this office, I mean, they said the statistics last night at Suffolk University. Out of 151 attorneys, 4 Latinos, 6 Black. And in the gang unit, of which Henning is the chief right now, I think there are no Blacks right now in the gang unit.
There's one now.
There is one?
It kind of mirrors
There's
the
one.
police department gang unit.
Yeah,
Right.
and there's 1 Latina right now in that unit. There was 2, but one of those individuals got promoted recently. And so I have to then question, is there really as much of a commitment to diversity as was talked about last night? Is there really that commitment now when they can't diversify the office that they currently run. And so I'm hopeful for this act. I think you're absolutely right that a lot of people, based on some of the books that have recently come out, right? Paul Butler's Let's Get
Chokehold.
Free, Die Trying.
Chokehold too.
Yeah, Chokehold. I haven't read that one yet. But the New Jim Crow, I mean, that opened up a lot of people's eyes, right, to some very hard data to really start asking this question: what difference can a DA make? And so people are looking for it, and this is a great opportunity here, not to focus on the deficit of the system, but to ask what is possible.
Well, it's a discovery. It's a sudden discovery that the DA is, again, significant. I mean, it's like the legislators around the country for years now.
Yeah.
The legislation, state legislators rather, were considered a position that a few people might run for, but not a huge, gigantic people, especially during the mid-year, the midterms. And now you see extraordinary number of people running across the country because the significance is realized that these things impact people's lives.
So, because now we have made it clear how important it is, we've given some clear examples of where it makes a difference when there is a decision made there. I mean, what's happening in the movement that you mentioned is really toward progressives.
That's right.
So let me just note also that Sean King out of New York, who's an activist and a writer, has started something called the Just PAC.
Right.
The Just Real, and it's really devoted to adding money to the campaign coffers of people who are running as progressives in DA races. But in this race, in the 5 that we know, Greg Henning is not would not be considered a progressive, and the others on some variants may be. So it stands that they could split the vote actually, and the movement here to go toward progressiveness can work against them, as our own David Bernstein here at WGBH News has written, and Greg Henning could be the clear winner. Yawu, you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, Henning's raised more money. He's got about 160,000, and he also has the support of. I looked through his campaign records. He had about $33,000 from police officers, which they're a pretty powerful force, and they vote as well. And this is going to be a low turnout primary, September 4th, right after Labor Day.
The day after Labor Day.
The day after
just
Labor Day.
Just to be clear.
Yeah. So with all that entails, it's gonna be tough for one of the other 4 candidates to stand out and beat him.
So, but I think that's the value of the ACLU's What a Difference a DA Makes campaign, because the level of engagement has increased now, and one of the things that our campaign is engaged in, we're not endorsing anybody, we're not supporting any candidates, but in addition to the public education forums that we're hosting, we're going to have the candidate debate on June 7th, where you're going to be our moderator. Yes. We're looking forward to that. But we're also doing court watch training, where people are going into the courts and observing what district attorneys are doing, but then they're going to go do canvassing and door knocking and make voter pledge cards so that people are committing, because the other thing that we found out in our polling that we did is that although people didn't understand that the district attorney was an elected official, once they found out this information, 81% of voters were more inclined to pay attention. And so even though it's a September 4th primary, which is a challenge, we're partnering with the Mass Voter Table and groups like Chelsea Collaborative, Chinese Progressive Association, New England United for Justice to really get out and make sure folks are going to pay attention, because you're right. Primary elections get a little bit of attention, but with the buzz around this and the work that we're doing, and folks can visit our website at dadifference.org to see more about it, I think it's going to be a lot of excitement, and that might make the shift in, as opposed to what has happened in prior years in primary elections.
It takes a lot more effort to get low the primaries such as this one really favor the high frequency voters, people who vote in every election. And it's a much smaller universe than the universe of people who vote in a presidential election or in a general election. So the efforts that you're talking about with voter identification, it's going to take robust get out the vote. Perhaps what might be somewhat encouraging is in Massachusetts in recent years, as white people have become affected by the opioid crisis, there's been more of a push for reform. If white voters are able to make the connection between those kinds of reforms and the kinds of sort of softer on crime policies that they now favor, that might also like, play into this, into how people vote on September 4th. But, that the September 4th is when it's all over in this race.
Yeah, and there's a lot of folk in that, and there's money's going to make a difference too. Let's just face it, money's going to make a difference. And right now, Henning and McCullough are at the top of the chain.
That's right.
But she was prepared to run even against Conley before he announced he was resigning.
She started raising money in
Right,
February, and she's got
right.
116,000.
Right. And all right, so we're going to leave it there for right now. That's the end of our broadcast, and I want to thank all of you, for joining us. And stay with us right now, though, as we continue our conversation on Facebook Live.